About 2 years ago, I knew that I was going to have to take a few days off. And whenever I have days off, I usually take my work with me. And I decided to do something totally different. To work on the same thing you work 7 days a week and continue it isn't much of a break. And then a thought occurred to me that maybe I should challenge myself with the Voynich manuscript, which I had heard about. And so I thought it made a lot of sense to do that. The other reason, besides it being the most enigmatic manuscript in the world right now, it does have a Lithuanian connection to it. It's named after Wilfrid Voynich, who discovered it in 1912. And he was born and raised in Telšiai, Lithuania. So there's a Lithuanian connection to it. And I would consider this to be, since it's named after him, part of Lithuanian literary history, which isn't recognized very well. So the thing about it, which is so interesting, it's got over 100 plant species illustrated in it. The vast majority of these are sort of imaginary plants. Botanists can recognize only a small percentage of them. So these are very imaginative plant creatures. Why they were illustrated in this fashion is not clear, not known. And the handwriting of the text here is beautiful. The lettering is gorgeous, and no one's been able to decipher this. What is said, written in this manuscript. Alan Turing, who is the father of computers, the father of artificial intelligence, he decoded the German World War II Enigma code. The Hollywood movie Imitation Game, where Benedict Cumberbatch plays him, about his life. He tried to decode it, wasn't successful. William Friedman, his team decoded the Japanese World War II Purple Code. And then when the National Security Agency, the NSA, that's the organization that Edward Snowden made so famous, was formed. He was the lead cryptographer. He hired a group of 8 different expert cryptographers and assigned them the Voynich manuscript. They made no progress with it either. Friedman asked his friend, Brigadier John Tiltman, cryptographer of British intelligence, to work on this and also made no progress. Well, if all these illustrious, and many other academicians have tried, worked at it, no one's really decoded it or explained it fully. And I knew that. And I thought, well, maybe it's time for me to step in. It makes sense. And I thought that since I was raised in the world of academia, that to approach this project in a standard academic method. And I realized that that would be a major mistake, especially with something that's been looked at so much and not figured out to date. The academic approach would have been a tremendously prejudiced one, in which I would have gone through online all the references, studied them to get a lay of the land of what people thought about it, and then you're stuck with people's ideas and concepts, and you can't come up with your own. And the biggest example of this in my own life was in 1973. I was a medical student at the University of Chicago, taking a course in pathology, and one day the lecturer spoke about stomach ulcers, and he showed slides of surgical specimens and people who died, the autopsy specimens, and he showed bacteria in the ulcers. And he had published a whole series of articles about it already by 1973, presented his material at national, international meetings, and he was very upset, because everyone was ignoring him. He was convinced that these bacteria have something to do with ulcers, and he was trying to educate the medical community about it, and everyone was ignoring him, because everyone knew the truth. And the truth, academic truth, was psychological stress causes stomach ulcers. And he was just totally ignored. Anyway, about two decades later, from the time he started doing his own work, Marshall and Morin in Australia, gastroenterologists in Australia, started looking at a specific bacteria, Helicobacter, and started collecting data, and they published the first report in 1984 of a bacteria causing ulcers. And the treatment would be antibiotics, okay, not psychological support. Initially, they were dismissed out of hand too because everyone knew the truth. And it took 10 years until in 1994 the World Health Organization recognized Helicobacter as a major cause of ulcers in the world in people. And that's standard treatment now. It's a very different approach from what it was in 1973. In 2005, Marshall and Warren got the Nobel Prize for their work. But my pathologists were left out in the cold, the consequence of the academic approach. No, I don't want to become pre-prejudiced. I like to approach this thing in open mind. The other problem with the academic approach is that people are super knowledgeable in small areas of expertise. Of course, this is a kind of a joke illustration here, but it's, I think, very much to the point. Here you have 6 different professors, all of them with their credentials, all of them publishing peer-reviewed articles, all of them getting their grants, and all of them absolutely accurate and correct of what they're reporting. But none of them realize that what they're actually looking at is a living creature, and it's an elephant. No one sees the whole of it. And that's the other problem with, with dissecting everything out. So my approach was different, and to try to avoid those academic pitfalls. In October of 2020, without any prejudice, without doing any literature review at all, except at very minimum, I took the 240-page book, manuscript, and went through every single page, looked at every single line, every single word in it, and went back and forth through it to come up with a totality. What is this all about? Which is what was apparently lacking. And if you have an idea of what this is all about, then you can gear future research approaches, investigations appropriately. Otherwise, you're looking at the tusk of the elephant or the tail of the elephant and have no idea what you're really doing at. After I made my own impressions of the totality, then I started in a literature review. And I've had almost 2 years now, on and off, to look at the literature and to compare what I found with what other people have themselves determined. This is one of the items that I looked at, a book in 2004 by Kennedy and Churchill. And this I finished reading just a few weeks ago. So this is not early on. A few weeks ago, I'm completing my literature review. And this is in the very last paragraph of their book. There's a summary of what they, and it's a very good book in terms of a lot of historical information about the manuscript. They wrote, "We are in danger of pulling apart the Voynich manuscript and seeing it only as a compilation of unconnected and discrete parts lacking a larger, meaningful whole. Surely a holistic approach will produce an all-encompassing explanation that this manuscript richly deserves." Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. Now, in approaching something like this, some academic ability is necessary. It really is mandatory. And for those who don't know me, I'd like to give just a little bit of background explanation in terms of where I'm coming from. I went to college and medical school at the University of Chicago, then and now one of the leading academic centers in the world. In my neurobiology research career, I've had 79 research publications, the majority of them peer-reviewed. I've received research grants of almost $3 million. I was a professor of neurology at the University of Toronto and then at the University of Illinois. And from a practical point of view, I reported the best survival rates of children with severe cerebral palsy, the best survival rates in the world, which I'm very proud of. And I pioneered vest therapy to prevent pneumonias and prevent death in children with severe cerebral palsy. It's a method now in use at all pediatric centers across North America, and many people in their homes use them now because of my work. And I'm very proud of that accomplishment too. That's my neurobiology work that I've done. But besides that, I also have had an artistic, creative aspect of my life because I've had a second simultaneous career, and that's in art. And I've had more than 50 individual art exhibits, I participated in more than 100 group shows. I've had a large number of commissioned artworks. My pieces are in collections and on display at museums and universities internationally. Because of the work I did commemorating the victims of Stalin's atrocities 10 years ago, I was awarded the title Man of the Year, which was quite an honor. And my art projects are still ongoing, amongst them the biggest one, which is still in the final stages of completion, is a large-scale outdoor installation of 230 boulders at Varnupė Sacred Mount, Piliakalnis in Lithuania. And hopefully this fall we'll be able at least to finish the big first phase of it. So that's my creative world. Now, I just want to give just a little brief review on some aspects of the manuscript. There is so much information has been published about it, easy to find. You just simply do a Google search. There are a large number of high-quality YouTube videos about the history on it, so please take a look at them if you want more background information. I won't rehash this material. There's a couple of things that I'm taking as a given. One thing is the dating of the manuscript. Radiocarbon dating has set it for the early 15th century. Exactly 600 years ago it was written, and almost certainly it was written in northern Italy. I won't go into the details of the reasons for it. That material is available online. Now, getting back to Wilfrid Voynich, born and raised in Telšiai, Lithuania. This was, and when he was growing up, this was part of Tsarist Russia, under Tsarist control, and he was a revolutionary. He protested the Tsar's occupation and was arrested by the Tsar's police and actually deported to Siberia. And after a few years, he was able to escape and ended up in London, England. Now, this is just a general picture of Europe, showing Lithuania, which is north of Ukraine, where the war is taking place. He ended up in London, England. He joined some revolutionaries there and realized that there was no profit to be made in this activity. Very quickly went into his lifelong career, that of dealing in rare books and manuscripts. And he established himself in London and then in New York City. And this is an advertisement that he ran in the London Times Literary Supplement in 1920, advertising his services, and with his addresses both in London and in New York. In 1912, he visited Villa Mondragone in Italy. This, at that time, was owned by the Jesuits, and it was their library. The building itself was in need of repair. There were some problems took place, and they didn't have the money to repair it. So they were willing to sell some of their rare manuscripts, and Voynich went there and purchased them. And that's how he obtained it, and this one unique manuscript now bears his name. The villa is located just on the outskirts of Rome on this map. Now, in terms of approaching this, I wanted to look at the actual manuscript, and the Skinner version of it is very, very nice because it has a faithful reproduction of every single page in order so that you can go through it page by page and really get a sense of everything that's in there, the images and the text itself, and that's what I did. And then for those who are not acquainted with it, let me just give you some examples of some of the high points in it. The plant species are non-biological. Only a small number of them are identified by botanists as corresponding to current species. On the right-hand side, for example, one leaf grows into the other leaf. Those kind of things don't happen naturally. The blossoms are very beautiful here, but there's nothing like that in the natural world. And the stem is grafted, looks like, into the root. And then the root is grafted, the root segment is grafted into another root segment, is grafted into another root segment. Now, grafting stems into stems is part of horticulture. That's commonly done. But to graft roots into roots, I can't imagine that any plant would survive that kind of a thing. So this is sort of imaginary constructs taking place here. In this example, you have the upper group of leaves growing out in a naturalistic fashion from the primary stem, but the lower group looks like all the leaves were grafted or spliced into broader stems that have been cut in a very strange fashion. And the root here is very beautiful. It's like two braids of human hair, women's hair looped around, sort of tied in the center. Now, on the left-hand side is a very elegant eight-pointed blossom, very pretty, like a star. And here it's not just simply grafted in, but it's inserted into the root, which is a sort of unusual thing. And on the right-hand side, again, the stems are, it looks like they're of this sort of cauliflower-like plant, are grafted into the roots, each of the three different roots. Something rather unusual. Now, this plant has received a lot of attention by individuals who claim it's a sunflower, and then claim to be able to decode part of the text in relation to sunflowers. Well, the similarity to sunflowers is extremely superficial. And if you look at, you compare sunflowers, real sunflowers, the leaves of the sunflowers, and then even dried sunflowers, they really are not this blossom at all. This is a very superficial similarity. The leaves on this the Voynich plant are not the leaves that you see growing on sunflowers, and the roots and the balls and the protuberances on it are very non-naturalistic, very strange. The other historical problem with calling this a sunflower is that there were no sunflowers in Europe in the early 15th century. Sunflowers were from North America, and they only appeared in Europe after Christopher Columbus's trip, so that these sunflowers appeared only about 100 years later after this manuscript was written. So these can't be sunflowers. There's other elements that show up in the plant drawings, and there are some animal-like features to them. The root structure here is like an eagle, spread eagle, a little bit reminiscent of the national symbol at that time of Lithuania and Poland. Here on the left-hand side, it looks like you have a lion crawling as the root with claws sticking out, with the plant grafted in as the neck. On the left-hand side, you have another creature now crawling towards the left. So you have these kind of animal features incorporated in these plant structures too, sort of an animal spirit or animal presence. But it goes beyond animals. You also have, I think, human elements incorporated in here. On the left-hand side, the root structure is very reminiscent of the female reproductive system. In the center would be the uterus and the two ovaries off to the side. In the plant on the right, where the ovaries are, you have two faces, where future generations of humans would come from. And then in other root drawings, you actually have faces of people. So it suggests that there's a human's kind of a spiritual presence in these particular plants that are being represented here. Now, besides now the plants, there's another section of these containers alongside the roots and other portions of the plants. Presumably the roots are being desiccated and prepared for storage as herbs, and that these jars on the left are apothecary jars where the herbs will be kept and stored and labeled for future use. Now, some of these jars, some of them are very, very plain, as these ones are, and other ones are very fancy ones, and very elaborate ones. And some of these may not have been with apothecary jars, may have been samovars, or used in some other purposes, such as to manufacture teas or other medicinals. And wherever these jars are, they're in conjunction with what looks like preparation of portions of the plants for herbal use. Another large section of the manuscript is called balneological. and that means bathing for healing purposes. And these bathing things are all with nude women, for women's bathing. Now, the only one that looks like a public bath is the one on the top left. And in the back you see columns and what looks like would be a roof structure, like what you'd see in a public bath. But that's the only one that looks like that. All the rest of them, of these greenish pools, are very much a suggestion of intestinal systems, part of our gastrointestinal system, or bladders that are being represented here where the women are bathing in. Here you have, again, two bladder-like structures, and then you have the water coming down through these canisters. These canisters are reminiscent of the apothecary jars that I just showed you, and it may very well be that the water was processed through herbal preparations in these channels, pick up medicinal properties, and then put in the water that the women would then be bathed in for healing purposes. Now, we're in this section, you also have other details that are emphasized. In the top one, you have these conduit from which fluid is flowing. And to me, this is very reminiscent of the vascular system, either the arteries or veins, which carry fluid throughout our bodies. And this portion may have to do with disorders of the vascular system. On the left-hand side in the center, that semicircled item looks very much like the pylorus of the stomach, where the stomach then eventually empties into the small bladder. And the outpouchings there could be the pancreatic duct, the biliary duct, the gallbladder connecting up there. So this could be a portion of that portion of our gastrointestinal system. And it may be that the text somehow relates to disorders of that portion of our body. Now, the top here, I think, is unmistakable, deals with the female reproductive system, and the text itself may deal specifically with disorders of female reproduction or aspects related to birth. On the left-hand side, the woman is standing in a cut-up thing that looks like the stomach, where you have the esophagus coming down and the small bowel coming out from it. And this may be, the text may refer to deal with disorders of the stomach. On the right-hand side, where you have that serpiginous structure, that to me looks like a small bowel. And this portion of the text may deal with disorders of the bowel and bowel movements. In the bottom portion here, again, it looks like a reference to the female reproductive system and possibly disorders related to it. And I'm mentioning this one very interesting little doodle on the right-hand side. In all cases where you have these women, they're all sort of together in a friendly fashion. There's only one case where there's an altercation taking place. And this one woman is pulling the other woman's hair, and she's very unhappy about it. That's the only altercation that I can find in the manuscript itself. Besides the balneological section, there's another section, the astronomical one. And this deals with the moon, the sun, stars, and all of these pages have text associated with them. I'll just show you a few pages. Some of them have spiral structures associated with them. Always there's text associated with it, and even ones that are dominated by stars, there's text associated with it. And a separate and distinct category is that of astrological, where you have the signs of the zodiac represented. And here you tend to have signs of the zodiac, again, with naked women. And this particular sign is Virgo. And the women are holding stars in their hands, and many of them, they're holding the stars with a string attached. But there's very little in the way of text. There's words around, but there's no text on these pages of the astrological section. Here's another example where the women now are in tubs, These could be bathing tubs or maybe some kind of birthing tubs. That's not clear. And again, the stars, and most of the stars have a string attached to them. But there's no text on these pages. This is one example where the women are dressed a little, just as opposed to being unclothed. And then the final section is 23 pages of text, and each paragraph of which is indicated by a star with a string associated with it. Now, to me, this is an inescapable sort of connection, that the only place where you see stars with strings associated with them is the final 23 pages of text. But you also see it in the astrological portion, where the women are holding the stars with a string. But in these pages, astrological ones, there isn't text. So I think there's a connection between these two things, where the stars here are indicating what we would call footnotes, connections between what the women are holding in their hands and then the text in the separate section here as footnotes, expounding on aspects of the astrological signs. Now, I'm just including a couple of images of just doodles. I think that the people who were writing the manuscript, in certain cases, just decided to be a little more elaborate in this beautiful text that they have, and come up with these very, very pretty elaborations. I don't think that these have any specific meaning to them other than being just beautiful. Very, very pretty ones. And then with all of the naked women, one of the doodles had to be sort of include what looks like a possible naked woman also. Just an aside. A supplemental text that I then looked at is a Clemens and Harkness printing, a reproduction of the manuscript, and it has a lot of additional historical information, background information, which is very valuable. But what's so unique about this one is that the manuscript itself has many pages that are fold-out pages. And this one reproduces the fold-outs fully. And the most impressive one is this 6-page fold-out, very large one, which in this one you can actually get the full sense of what was originally done in the manuscript. Now, so I reviewed everything, and then had a chance to pull my thoughts together, cogitate, go back, think about it over several days, and come up with a series of impressions that I'll be sharing with you. The primary impression that I had was one name of a person in giant blinking neon lights. To me, it was just inescapable. The Voynich manuscript is connected to Hildegard von Bingen. Now, Hildegard lived about 250 years earlier in Germany. But she was an incredibly remarkable person. She was literate. She was extremely well educated. She was a theologian, a scholar. She was a specialist in herbs and herbal medicines, and she was a local physician where she had set up her own convent. She was expert in beautiful music that she's composed. The poetry that she wrote was extremely elegant and beautiful. She corresponded with emperors and with popes, many of them, and in an altercation with the local archbishop, she was able to face him down, and he had to give in to her demands. This is totally in keeping with what Hildegard's spirit was all about. Now, she lived in Germany, and the manuscript was authored in northern Italy 250 years later. The geographic distance is not great, given that time period. And it wasn't that Hildegard herself was somehow involved in it, but her legacy was transmitted and I think is the basis for this entire manuscript. Now, the overall purpose of this manuscript, to me, it's inescapable. This is a women's health manual geared towards women's health. Emphasis is on using herbs, on growing them, on preparing them, and then on knowing how to use them and prepare them as medicinals, particularly in baths, but possibly in other forms of use. Part of, a incredibly important part of the preparation of the herbs and using them is astrology, astronomy. When do you plant the herbs? When do you harvest them? When do you prepare them? How long do you desiccate them? And then when do you use them? These astrological aspects of it, I think, are very, very important in this manuscript. And at that time period, I think it was very important. And many people, even now, are not going to make major decisions in their lives without having some astrological consultations taking place. It's still part of many people's active lives. So, so this is what the core of this entire manuscript, and it puts all of the pieces of the manuscript together. Now, the other stunning thing to me was the amount of repetition over and over and over. There was a lot of repetition of words, but was overwhelming were the syllables repetition, the beginning and ending, the suffix, suffix and prefix. Repeated. So much so that there had to be a reason for it. Now, let me give you an example. This is one of the balneological pages. And if you just look at the upper left-hand corner, and you look at the first three letters, the number 4, 0, and the stylized letter H. And I've underlined in this little corner the where this appears. And it's unbelievable. The frequency on this page where this is showing up. This is not a natural spoken language. It can't be. Now, if you look at the entire page, it consists of 3 paragraphs. The incidence of 4, 0, stylized H varies from paragraph to paragraph, but overall, 26%. 26% of the words all start in the same fashion, the same syllable. That is not a natural spoken language. There's something very unique about this thing. Okay, now let's look at the ending. The number 8 and number 9 as endings of words. Look, it's just overwhelming here too. If this is from the same page, I just took a section of it. And if you look at the entire page, three different paragraphs, slightly different, overall, 36% of the words end in 8 and 9. This is just incredible repetition taking place. And if you put together the beginning, the 4, 0, 8, stylized H, with 8 and 9, and either put a C or a double C in it, you have words, and one of these, with the single C, about 5% of the words on this page are that, with a double C of another 5%. So in other words, basically 10% of the words are all the same words on this particular page. Repetition, repetition. There has to be a reason why this repetition is taking place, and so much of it. And the only reason that I can think of that makes sense is that this was not meant to be read. It was not meant for information. This was meant for the sound, for the singing, for chanting, where the sound is of utmost importance. The sound. You sing it and you chant it, and it will go repeat, repeat, repeat to produce its effect. Singing. This is a constructed language. This language was created for a specific purpose, to produce sounds that then would be used as part of healing processes. Now, well, where are we back? We go back 250 years now again. We're bouncing back to Hildegard von Bingen. Lingua ignota. She created her own language. It consisted of 23 letters, and they're all based on the Roman alphabet. And these are the letters that she created herself. And she had a little bit over 1,000 nouns. The origin of the words were either, most of them, vast majority were Latin, and some of them were German in origin that she used, is only nouns. And it's not exactly clear why she did this, but it is known that she did communicate with the other nuns in her convent using this language, presumably for privacy's sake, so that nobody else would be able to understand what they were saying. Okay, so, but she did do this herself as her own constructed language 250 years earlier. And I think the entire manuscript is in her spirit. And so this is the essence of it, is conveyed into this manuscript as a constructed language. Now, 250 years later, the world landscape is completely different from Hildegard. When Hildegard was alive, there was no Inquisition. The Inquisition started the next century. And in the 15th century, early 15th century, the Inquisition was in full force. A gigantic reason for secrecy. Things dealing with women's issues would have been very suspect, and with any kind of suggestion of any magical rituals would have been a certain death sentence. The Inquisition mandated secrecy, and that's a major reason, I think, why this was written in a form that would be hard to understand directly. By the way, the same slide I showed you by William Friedman, the NSA cryptographer, head of the team, he himself eventually, after studying this thing, decided that this was a constructed language. So I'm not the only one in this territory. When you look at the lettering that's in use, just as you look at Hildegard's Lingua Ignota, you look at it, it's inescapable. It's based on Romance language. Hildegard's was very clearly based on the Latin alphabet, but this also was. The origin of the script that comes out of what was in use in northern Italy at the time, and this would have been Italian, Latin, and German. Okay, that would have been the origin of the lettering and the sounds associated with the lettering. So, the summary on it is this is a women's medical manual where singing, chanting in association with astrological factors, astronomical factors produced healing rituals for specific disorders for women's ailments. The other implication comes up is that the biologic accuracy of the plant drawings wasn't important. Not important. It almost could be any plant that's used, as long as you do it properly in conjunction with the correct astrology, the correct preparation steps of it, according to astrological sense, and then with the proper chanting, the proper invocation, you produce the necessary effects. So biologic accuracy wasn't that important. Other aspect of this thing, this was a group activity. It's not one person sitting down and writing it. And this was written in a women's convent, just as Hildegard's Lingua Ignota was done. This is also women's group activity. And I think it's evident from several different things. One thing is the text itself, I think, shows several different hands were used. I think a different hand did illustrations, maybe several different hands, and definitely somebody else did the painting. So this is a group activity took place here. And in terms of the production on it, the illustrations were definitely drawn first, and the text was written around the drawings. And then later the color was applied. And regrettably, a lot of the color application was basically sloppy. Now, these are two facing pages, and I think just a brief look at this, it's inescapable that you have two different handwritings taking place here, two different people writing it. Now, taking pieces from both of these two pages and putting them side by side, these are the same size, nothing's been enlarged. I think it's inescapable. You have two different individuals authoring these two different pages. Now, Captain Prescott Curry is one of the cryptographers working on this manuscript in the 1970s. He initially thought that there were two scripts that he called Courier A and then Courier B. And these are examples of them, as I showed you that just now. And eventually he thought that there were 12 different handwritings. Other handwriting experts have looked at this, and there's even estimates up to 15 different writers. But there's definitely more than one distinct handwritings. In the Kennedy-Churchill book, they feel comfortable illustrating 4 different examples. So there are other individuals. And again, this does look like 4 different hands writing. Now, Brigadier Tiltman, who I mentioned before, British intelligence, in 1975 prepared a report, which is a very interesting one. I think has considerable implication. He noticed that in Courier A and Courier B, the endings of 8 and 9 are very different frequency. Now, I showed you the ending 8 and 9, and when I did my own review, that was about 1.5 years ago that I pulled that particular information together and that slide together. This I just came up with a few weeks ago, that he had done this independently himself, but much prior to me. And he noticed the difference, that in Courier A, it's almost very rare, and in Courier B, it's very, very frequent. Now, these are in the pages that I picked out to show you. It's about 1% in Courier A, and a very high percentage in Courier B. And when Tiltman reported it himself in 1975, he took 25 pages of A script, and he was able to find this 8-9 ending in only 8 words. And taking 25 B pages, he found it in 554 words. Tremendous difference. And this is in the same manuscript. A large number of pages written in the same script. But the endings of the words are very, very different depending on the person who's writing it. The words are different. The spelling is different. But the manuscript is the same, all put together. And A and B are intermixed many pages in many cases. So there's different spellings taking place in the manuscript itself. It's inescapable by the different people writing it. Meaning spelling isn't important. Another thing which I noticed, and that many other people have noticed, there's no corrections taking place in them anywhere. 240 pages, and you have text everywhere, especially at the ending of it. A massive amount of text. It's inconceivable that a person writing wouldn't make mistakes. No corrections are there. I think this argues that it doesn't matter if an error took place. It's irrelevant. The spelling isn't what's important. What's key is the sound. The sound is important. Spelling is important. Language corrections aren't necessary as long as the flow of the sound is maintained. Now, if the sound is so important, now what was the sound? Given that this is based on a Romance language, what are possible transliterations? Now, there are a large number of different transliterations of the Voynich alphabet, but these are all done basically by cryptographers with the idea of using unique identifiers for the different letters, which then could undergo computer analysis. So, for example, in the vast majority of cases, in the manuscript where you have the number 2, number 4, number 8, number 9 show up, these numbers are kept because the computers identify them as unique identifiers. But that gives you no idea what the sound was. What was the sound of 2, 4? It wasn't numbers, it was some sound associated with it. So that these cryptographs, the vast majority of them are really not usable in that regard in terms of trying to see what was the sound. People weren't orientated towards that at all. Now, the European Voynich alphabet took a step in the right direction, but still not fully so. If you look at F, the small f and the capital F, in the sound, whether it's a small f or a capital, is the same. It's a F. But the Voynich letter associated with it is different. They're similar, but what they ascribe to it is different. Wouldn't they not have had the same sound? In the Voynich manuscript, there is no apparent capitalizations, there's no punctuations. So this Voynich, European Voynich alphabet is a step in the right direction, but it's not sufficient at all. It doesn't produce unique sounds for the different letters of the alphabet. But there is a person who has gotten into this, and I think needs to be recognized for what he's done. Gerard Cheshire. He's affiliated with the University of Bristol in the United Kingdom, and I think he's produced a very reasonable first approximation to the sounds of the letters in the Voynich manuscript. Now, he has come under a tremendous amount of criticism from the academic community and other people interested in the manuscript. Unjustifiably so. Now, there's a lot of things, he's published a lot of articles, particularly in the past few years. I personally disagree with a lot of what he's written about. But he's made some major advances. The criticisms of him oftentimes are very mean-spirited, very close-minded, and very unprofessional. And I think that it's important to recognize contributions when people's made, even when you may disagree with them. And I think that he's made a step in the right direction, needs to be recognized for that. And I think future research has to go in, not necessarily identical to what he's done, but using aspects of what his concepts and ideas are, because they mesh with my own completely. And I think it's a very reasonable first approximation to the sounds. Now, this is what he came up with, that he's published, and then you can use that. Now, I took this paragraph out of the balneological section. I transliterated it using Cheshire's terms. And then online there's a artificial intelligence program by a Speechello company that I purchased, and it converts text into spoken language. And you can use a number of different intonations to it. The spoken language had to be by a female voice, and to my ear, the best sounding was the German intonation. Now, that I've produced, and it's on a separate YouTube video, which I'll be releasing at the same time this one is. Now, the speech is fine, but the purpose of the Voynich manuscript and the content was, I think, to sing it, to chant it, to incant it, the ultimate use of it in its healing rituals. So to take the next step further was to find somebody who would be able to take this transliterated text and produce something appropriate to that time period. Now, I hired Tehana Nikolic. She goes under the name Soul Pacifica. She's of Croatian descent, lives in Germany. She's a music producer, vocalist, and violinist. And I asked her to come up with her own melody based on Hildegard von Bingen's own compositions, her own music. For the first premiere presentation of Voynich manuscript sung, I wanted to, again, bring attention and credit to Hildegard's work, and not use something from the early 15th century, but something from her time period, the 12th century. And so she did that, and it's beautiful and it's captivating, and I invite you to take a look at that separate YouTube video to get a sense of what this Voynich manuscript may have originally sounded like and what the purpose of it was. Now, getting back into the manuscript itself, this is the cover of it. It's kept at Yale University's Beinecke Rare Book Room. During restorations at Yale University, the cover was opened up, and you can see where the groups of pages where they're folded and sewn together, how that appears. So there's groupings of pages here. And those separate groupings are indicated in this drawing. and it's very clear that pages are missing. By the numbering, they're missing, and these unknown when these were disappeared were taken out. Almost certainly this is the way the manuscript was when Voynich obtained it. So it wasn't his handiwork that did it, but it was at some point during its 600 years of existence. Now, when you look at it, there's a couple of just interesting things. These are 2 pages, 78 verses and 81 rectus. And it looks like they should be a continuity. On the left page, you have two kind of tubes coming down, which connect up with the tubes on the right-hand side. And you have the pools of green water the women are bathing in, very similar. It looks like these should be connected. Well, if you look at the way the choirs are actually constructed, these are connected. It is connected. It's the same page. 78 verses is the same sheet as 81 rectus. It's the same sheet. These are a connected drawing. But somehow 4 pages, 79 and 80, the numbering, got put in there. So now they're separated when you look through the book, page through it. But what that tells me very clearly is that this current binding is not the original manuscript. This was rebound by somebody at some point in time, and it's not in keeping with the original. Now, the numbering system is what we see now. That is not original either. That numbering is not correct. So the current binding is wrong, not the original. The numbering is totally not original. That tells me already, you can know that already. There's one other example. I'll give you a further example. These are now 2 pages that are very similar in content. You have these bladder-filled areas where women are bathing, and on the top you have these pineapple-like structures producing water, which are then going into the baths. The only pages in the Voynich manuscript that have these pineapple structures are these, doing this, are these 2 pages. It makes sense that these would be facing each other. It makes sense, only rational sense. It makes just common sense. But they're not. They're not facing each other at all. But look at choir 13. It's the same choir. Is it possible to make these 2 pages facing? 78 are rectus and 84 verses. Can you do it? Yeah, take choir 13 apart. Fold them up as they're folded, and then you can put them facing. You can have 84 rectus face 78 verses, no problem at all. It easily would be done. But the total arrangement is different. The numbering is, and I'm certain that in the original manuscript, these would have been facing pages, just as the 78 and 81 was separate and folded together. So the implications of this thing is that the order is not original and the numberings are not original, and somebody did this at some point in time during the 600-year existence of the manuscript. Now, what I had thought is that if you study where the 40 missing pages have been taken out, that might give some indication of what was removed. But when you have no idea what the original order was, and the numbering is entirely incorrect and nothing to do with the original manuscript, there's nothing no inferences you can make about what was removed. So now let me get back to 250 years earlier, to Hildegard von Bingen. These are some illustrations from her book Civius that she didn't actually draw these, but these were illustrations drawn under her supervision, where you have lots and lots of stars, as in the Voynich manuscript. Stars and circles. You have the celestial hosts encircling the divine center. And so the Voynich manuscript, when you look at it as a whole, now the summary sort of statements I wanted to come up with are now at the very end. It's a women's medical manual, is what it is. And it's a group activity written by women in a convent. Now, these are not my original ideas. These have been other people who have had the same comments and same ideas, but I think this definitely is what this is. It's a constructed language for a specific purpose, for healing purposes. The sounds are based on a Romance language, and it would have been Italian, Latin, and German. Again, these are not my original ideas, but I think it's inescapable. That's where this entire thing. Now, with my insights and my understandings, and I think in my literature review, I've not been able to come up with other people that have had similar ideas. Maybe I've not been able to find them, or somehow I haven't noticed them. But as of today's date, these are unique insights. I think the stars with strings appearing both in the astrological section and the text section indicate that these sections are linked, and these are actually footnotes connecting one to the other. And with the order being totally wrong in the way it's bound right now, I think it's most likely that this text portion was adjacent or interleaved with the astrological section, so that when you're seeing the astrological signs, the text would have been right there, the footnotes would have been right there. The specific organs being indicated on some of the pages in there, I think, indicate treatment of specific diseases, of specific ailments. Women's reproductive health was the primary goal. And related to that was the primary purpose in the manuscript, as in women in general. The health circulates around that as a major one, but other areas where the stomach, where vascular supply, where the hepatobiliary system would have had specific texts associated with it. I think that text is associated with those specific areas of bodily illness. The thing that I've not come across is this picking up on zoomorphic elements and anthropomorphic elements in the plants themselves, in the representation of plants themselves. I think this belies a sense of spirituality, common spirituality, us human spirits pervading nature around us, that we have common spirits with animals and with the plants around us, and it's sort of a common spiritual world. I think that shows up in the manuscript in the zoomorphic and anthropomorphic aspects here. The singing, chanting, healing rituals. The purpose of the language there is to heal through the sound of singing, the sound of chanting. The spelling is not important. Language corrections are not important. The sound is important, along with use of herbs and all of the necessary astrological related steps along the way. That's what's important. And with the spelling not being important, there's no possibility of doing a cryptographic decoding of it. You can't. It's not encoded. It's not a cryptographic issue. So that's why it's been not successful to date. It never will be. People have been looking in the wrong area. Biologic accuracy of the plants is not important, because the chanting, along with astrological factors, will produce the desired effects. That's why you have all these different imaginary plants reproduced here. And in a sense, the first plant that I showed you in today's presentation is a summary of splicing and grafting, where you have different elements here: astrology, astronomy, plants, herbs, bathing, different organ systems placed together to put together, grafted together to produce the healing effect that you're necessary. So this is sort of this image is a capsule summary of the Voynich manuscript's purpose itself. And I don't want to forget, this is part of the legacy of Hildegard von Bingen. I think it's inescapable. So much of her own career dealt with aspects of this manuscript: the singing, the chanting, absolutely a women's convent, absolutely so, herbal therapy, the spirituality pervading nature, common themes throughout it. The constructed language, pure Hildegard. But Hildegard, there's a difference here though. Hildegard was a source of enlightenment at that time period. She was a beacon in a world of darkness at that time, a unique individual, entirely unique person. And she was a scientist, using the scientific method. Now the manuscript itself gets into what we would call magic. This is not part of Hildegard's world, so it's different. It differs in that regard. But still it's in her legacy, and it's a homage to her. Now, the premier audio presentations are spoken and sung. They're in the accompanying 2 YouTube videos that are going to be released along with this one. And any further information, please check out my website. And thank you very much for listening.